What is up, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network here on this lovely Friday evening. Coming here and doing our second edition of the start sit videos for this week. We're going to be talking about all the late games on the slate. We're talking the afternoon games on Sunday. We're talking the Sunday night game, the two Monday night games, as there always are in week one, and lots of interesting storyline going on in this one. One quick note for those of you that watched the stream yesterday. Kenny Golladay, we were expecting to be questionable, but now it's looking like he's going to end up being doubtful. So for those of you that are looking to pivot off of him, obviously Marvin Jones becomes a really good play this week, but you probably didn't draft both of them. Hopefully we can find someone here because there's some interesting names in some of these games that you can potentially pivot to that are most likely on the waiver wire. So keep that in mind. And then obviously we'll get to Mike Evans. So already dealing with some crazy injuries here, Cortland Sutton as well. So this is going to be a incredibly crazy week one. We knew that this was going to be a pretty intense year before we even started, and it's already proving to be exactly that with the number of high-profile players that are already dealing with injuries. It really sucks, but at the same point, I'm glad football is back, so we'll do the best we can to get you guys, help you navigate through it and find some decent starts for you this week. Okay, so beginning with the Chargers and the Bengals. So one of the more boring games on the slate, I guess, but this is going to be a pretty interesting reveal because Bengals obviously drafting Joe Burrow with the number 1 overall pick. Don't have another quarterback on the roster. They are bringing him in and throwing him straight into the fire going against a pretty decent Chargers defense. Now, this is obviously a little bit weakened without Derwin James, but they're still pretty strong overall. And I'm expecting this one to be a little bit of a lower score game, as is Vegas. Vegas here, 42.5 over under, implying that the Chargers are going to win this one by 3, giving the Chargers a 23-20 victory in the implied points. Now, with Tyrod Taylor leading the charge for the Chargers, it's going to be a different offense than what we're used to seeing, right? I mean, we're used to seeing Phillip Rivers throw the ball a ton. Phillip Rivers has a tendency to throw a lot to his slot receiver and the running backs. Tyrod Taylor has never really maintained a efficient fantasy receiver in his career playing as a quarterback. We're not expecting this to be a prolific pass offense by any means. If anything, this might be one of the more boring offenses in the entire NFL. Obviously, the question becomes, how long will Taylor be able to hang on to that job before they want to bring in the rookie Herbert? But I think that Taylor definitely has a chance at maintaining his job for a while, but it's going to have to come with him getting victories, right? If he's not getting dubs, then there's going to be clamors for Herbert to start. But we're not too worried about that, at least in the first week, unless Taylor gets hurt, which he's also been known to do. So last year, like we said, Chargers, decent defense, not the greatest against the run, which that's kind of been their weakness for a while. They want to funnel everything through the run game and lock you down on your receivers and your tight ends, which we'll get to in a second. Whereas the Bengals were pretty poor throughout, 26th against the receivers, 26th against the tight ends last year, 29th against quarterbacks, and right in the middle against running backs. So the Bengals defense, not a defense that we're exactly scared of for fantasy purposes, whereas the Chargers defense, a little bit more stifling. But as I said, I'm expecting this game to be a decently low-scoring affair. That being said, we have obviously our studs in this game we're going to start. Austin Eckler could have a complete smash game. Bengals are really bad at stopping running backs, especially ones that get thrown the ball. And from what we know, Eckler is going to still see a decent bit of the passing volume for the Chargers. With Joshua Kelly there, Justin Jackson potentially taking the Melvin Gordon role and splitting it into 2. We're not really sure how much Eckler is going to be involved. We're expecting there to be some regression in the passing game because Phillip Rivers is really good at getting the ball in the air to his running backs. Obviously, Rivers is gone, so we're expecting that ceiling to come down a little bit for Eckler, but overall, I'm still pretty excited for Eckler, especially this week against the Bengals. I think he'll have a pretty good game with Mike Williams likely out. Keenan Allen is pretty much the only guy that they have throwing the ball, now the second highest paid receiver in the NFL. He's going to get his. And then obviously Hunter Henry is most likely going to get targeted a bunch in this game. I'm not sure that they'll all have blow-up games, but they should definitely all be worth starts. You drafted them with the intention of starting them, except for maybe Henry, but I think you can definitely start Henry this week. And then you throw the Chargers D out there if you are hoping for Burrow to commit a few mistakes, maybe take a few sacks. You might get a few defensive points there. And because we're expecting this to be a lower scoring game, I think the Chargers D are a fine play this week. I'm not really going to throw out Joshua Kelly or Justin Jackson. I mean, between the two of them, I prefer Joshua Kelly based on what we've seen in camp. I think Joshua Kelly ends up getting the majority of the workload outside of Eckler, but I don't know that that is going to be something that is going to turn into anything for week one. Really want to see how that situation works itself out. And while Tyrod Taylor is definitely a decent DFS play if you're looking for a really cheap option, probably not going to be looking to start him in seasonal long leagues. And there's really no one else on LA that you want to be looking at this week. Excuse me. And then jumping over to the Bengals. Now, we mentioned that the Chargers have historically been really bad at stopping the run, and I don't expect that to change much this year, which makes Joe Mixon one of the better plays of this week. In a lower scoring game where we're not really sure how much Joe Burrow is going to be able to, let loose in this first game in the NFL, Mixon should get a ton of work in this game, should be getting plenty of checkdowns out of the backfield as well. Mixon could be one of the best running backs on the week, so start Mixon with absolute confidence this week. And then, AJ Green's telling us he's 100% with a hamstring. I'm not really sure if I buy it, but at the same point, if you drafted AJ Green, you likely believed in him. And while we haven't seen him since 2018, he does give us tremendous upside every time he's on the field. So if you have AJ Green, probably want to throw him out there. And I really think Tyler Boyd is going to have a tremendous season. He could very much fill that Justin Jefferson role, playing out of the slot there with Joe Burrow. Now, would I actually start Joe Burrow in week one in a tough defensive matchup where we're not expecting there to be a lot of points scored? Could be a little bit sloppy week one. Probably not going to throw Burrow out there, but I wouldn't definitely completely advise against it. I think he could still give enough fantasy value to warrant a start, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. But in single quarterback leagues, hopefully you have a better option than having to throw Burrow out there in his very first start in the NFL. I'm not going to take a risk on any of the other guys here. I didn't add Auden Tate here, but Auden Tate, John Ross, T. Higgins, CJ Uzomah, and the Bengals defense, not going to mess around with any of those guys. Now, in terms of how I think this game will go, I expect it to be low scoring, but I think the Bengals can actually pull this one out. The Chargers always seem to find a way to lose their opening week, and I don't think that that's really going to change even though it's 2020 and everything's weird. Watch Joe Burrow lead the Bengals to a season opener victory against the Chargers. I got them winning 20-17. All right. So I skipped Eckler for Juju needing an RB2 still. I just don't buy into Eckler. I've been struggling with Eckler the entire offseason and trying to figure out how I feel about him. I've gone up and down. I think he's a really good running back, and I think he's going to have plenty of games where he returns value on his pick. I am still concerned overall with the volume in that offense as to how much he's actually going to get used, especially in the passing game. Like, that volume has to come down just by necessity of not having Phillip Rivers. But with losing Melvin Gordon, I think there's still enough room for him to be a pretty productive back. James Robinson is a sleeper. How do you feel about him? So we talked about James Robinson yesterday. If you want to go back and listen to it in the Jaguars-Colts game, I like James Robinson. I think he's a stash in season-long leagues, but I'm not willing to throw him out there in week one. As we saw with Clyde Edwards-Helaire last night, rookie running backs very rarely get used in the passing game much. That's pretty much Chris Thompson's role as long as he's staying healthy. And we're expecting that to be a game where the Colts handle it pretty decisively. So the Jaguars are going to have to abandon the run at some point in the second half. And that could mean that James Robinson doesn't really get to see the field too much in the second half of the game. So I feel like his ceiling is pretty low this week, and his floor is also low. So I wouldn't really be throwing him out there in week one, but it's definitely worth hanging on to him. And that's pretty much, all right, that's it for questions now. Like I said, same thing we do every night whenever we do the stream. We'll answer you guys' questions in between the videos. Obviously, if you've seen, we chop these videos up and post them after, so that's kind of why I don't look at the questions, until we're done with the individual videos. So ask your questions. I'll be sure to get back to them. But for now, let's jump over and take a look at the Cardinals 49ers game. And man, I don't know if any of you have been paying attention to the news, but this game is potentially one of the more panicky games on the slate. With the current situation in California and the rising smoke levels, there is a potential chance that this game gets outright canceled. Now, hopefully, if they know that that's going to happen, they'll have a pivot play. I mean, the Cardinals aren't traveling to San Francisco until tomorrow. And I would hope that, considering how close these guys are in terms of their travel schedule, that they would pivot and play this game in Arizona. I don't know if that's on the cards. I haven't heard one way or another, but if the air quality is continuing to get worse, like we were close to the point today where it is beyond safe levels for NFL players to play on a football field, and if the air quality continues to get worse, as it's being projected to do, this game is most certainly in jeopardy. And if they outright cancel it, this is a later game on the slate. Lots of big fantasy names: George Kittle, Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, Kenyon Drake, Raheem Mostert. All of these guys we're going to need to have a backup plan for, because if this game gets canceled Sunday morning, you're not going to have a lot of time to pivot. So keep this in mind. If you guys have leagues where you have waiver runs, we're going to need to have a few backup plans just in case. Now, I'll go through and talk about this assuming the game happens, but keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking about this. So this is a pretty juicy matchup, and right now Vegas has this game projected to be 48 over-under, with the 49ers winning by 7, giving us about 27.5 to 20.5 for the Cardinals. Obviously, last year the Cardinals were pretty bad on defense all around across the board, one of the worst teams in the league against the tight end. Going against George Kittle, that's not going to be a very fun matchup for the Cardinals defense. Now, the 49ers last year were pretty good at funneling against the run. They started to lose their strength against the tight ends over the back half of the year, but they were normally a good point funnel for receivers. We're expecting the 49ers defense to take a little bit of a step back this year as well. And obviously, with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, getting Kenyon Drake signed on to a pretty decent deal for this year, we're expecting Kyler Murray to take a step forward. I like this game a lot, assuming it happens. I think this game will definitely be one of the saucier games in terms of fantasy points being scored, and I actually like the over in this one. So there's going to be a lot of really good plays here. So starting with the Cardinals, I mean, this one's pretty much chalk. If you drafted Murray, you drafted Drake, and you drafted Hopkins, you're going to throw them out there and start them. And I shouldn't have to, explain why, but I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is being shadowed by a 32-year-old Richard Sherman who clearly has shown signs of slowing down. I don't think Hopkins is going to have any problem getting past him. Now, Kirk is an interesting name as well. I'd be willing to flex him in a decent situation, depending on how deep your bench is. But with Larry Fitzgerald still there, I am so concerned for volume in terms of how much this offense gets spread around. That air raid offense can really spread the ball around, in terms of who ends up getting a lot of targets. With Andy Isabella there as well, there could be a lot of frustration with the receiver options here, at least until we have a idea of how this offense is going to look. I'm probably going to stick with just playing Hopkins until I know otherwise. If Kirk takes a massive leap forward, he's on your bench, great. Even if he blows up, don't sweat it too much. And then obviously Edmonds is probably going to get a little bit of work and spell Drake a bit, but until Drake gets hurt, Edmonds is probably going to remain on your bench. I'm not going to throw Larry Fitzgerald or Dan Arnold. I'm definitely not going to start the Cardinals D because I'm expecting this to be a pretty high-scoring game overall. And then in terms of the 49ers, I really think even with the amount of receiver injuries that they're dealing with right now, Jimmy Garoppolo is a pretty decent start. Again, the Cardinals are not an imposing defense by any means. The lack of the ability for the Cardinals to stop the tight ends last year, we'll see if that continues into this season. But with George Kittle being as dominant as he is, he could have a massive game. Looks like Deebo Samuel is out, but I do think Brandon Ayuk will at least get to play a little bit. But even outside of that, Trent Taylor, Kendrick Bourne, Jimmy Garoppolo is still going to be able to find a way to get things done here against the Cardinals in a game that should be a shootout. Still think Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the cheaper options this week. And with Tevin Coleman, I'm not exactly sure why or what his condition is, but he actually wasn't practicing these last couple of days with the smoke in the air. And there's a chance that even if this game plays, that Tevin Coleman doesn't suit up. I'm not sure what condition he has that's actually precluding him from playing, but Apparently, he's not able to play at even lower levels of pollution in the air. So Tevin Coleman is someone that's pretty much a hard fade for me. And if he's out, that kind of elevates Jerick McKinnon into an interesting situation, especially in tourney plays for DFS. But Mostert should be a pretty solid start this week. And if you need a flyer, I do think Kendrick Bourne puts a pretty decent chance at scoring a touchdown this week. So if you need like a last-second dart throw, Kendrick Bourne is definitely an option for you there. In terms of how I think this game is going to go, though, guys, I think the Cardinals can actually surprise in this one. Typically, teams coming off that Super Bowl loss, have a little rust to knock off, and sometimes they get smacked in the face. I think the Cardinals are an ascending team, and I would not be surprised if the Cardinals take the 49ers down in this one. I got the Cardinals winning this one by 3. All right, let's check out what's going on over here. Lots of comments going on. So let me just page through a couple of these. Okay, we're talking about Hooper here. So, I'm sorry, Cooper. So we're talking about being hesitant to play Cooper going up against Ramsey. So here's the thing. Last time the Rams played the Cowboys, it was near the end of the year. That was after Cooper had suffered his, I believe, was it his shoulder or his knee? I can't remember what he had hurt halfway through the season. Having a bit of a brain fart here, but Cooper was not playing well after that point. And, typically Ramsey doesn't shadow the guys that play in the slot. With the addition of CeeDee Lamb, I think the plan is for Gallup and Lamb to play outside and Cooper to play in the slot for the most part. And I don't know that Ramsey will actually follow Cooper into the slot. So if we're worried about anyone this week getting the Ramsey treatment, it might actually be Gallup over Cooper. So considering where you drafted Cooper and considering the over-under on that game, I would still be starting Cooper this week. Let's see. You can play. I wouldn't play Chris Thompson over Cooper. Like, again, it's week 1. Let's not overthink these matchups. Cooper does historically perform worse against good cornerbacks, but it also comes into play. He's healthy now, and when Cooper is healthy, you want to play him. And if you drafted him, you probably got him in the 3rd or the 4th round. If you're already talking yourself out of playing him, you probably should just trade him away because this isn't going to go away as the season goes on. But again, I'm not really concerned with Ramsey jumping into the slot. He's most likely going to end up playing off of whoever's in the X, and that could definitely be Gallup a lot this week. Let's see. James Robinson or J.K. Dobbins? Okay, that is actually a really interesting question. I think Robinson is more guaranteed for touches, but J.K. Dobbins definitely has more explosive upside. Assuming it's a PPR league, I would go Dobbins. If it's not a PPR league, if it's like a standard or a half-point league, and then maybe I swing over to James Robinson just for the guaranteed touches. But I think Dobbins gives you a little bit more explosive upside, so I might go Dobbins regardless. But Chris Thompson, of those 3, yes. Especially if it's PPR, I would go Chris Thompson over James Robinson and J.K. Dobbins this week. The Jaguars should be playing catch-up pretty early on in that game, and I think Chris Thompson is going to be in a lot of 2-minute and hurry-up situations where he'll be on the field a lot. Chris Thompson could actually be a really, really nice flex play in PPR this week. I do really like Michael Gallup. Like, don't hear me wrong, but I think this could be a week that Michael Gallup actually underperforms because of Jalen Ramsey. Let's see what else we got here. All right, I think that's about it. So, keep asking questions. I'll get back to them once we get to through this next game. Now, jumping over to the Buccaneers and the Saints. This is going to be probably the most viewed game on the week. Anyone that has been waiting to see the debut of Tom Brady, we're unfortunately not going to be able to see him with Evans and Godwin. It's looking like Evans is doubtful for this one. Another wide receiver injury that is unfortunately already plaguing us in this rough year. But there's plenty of weapons to go around. I think this is still a pretty competitive game going on into New Orleans. And yeah, so Vegas has a pretty high over-under on this one, 48 as well, same as the Cardinals 49ers. Should be some really good games in that afternoon slate. Right now, the Saints are projected to win by 4, giving us an implied point total of 26-22 for the Saints. So last year, the Buccaneers were the best team against the run, the worst team against the receivers. Like, they really sold out to stop the run and could not stop receivers at all. I do expect their defense to be a bit better this year with a few key additions, and obviously with not having Jameis Winston constantly giving the other team the ball in bad situations, I think the Bucs defense will just look better by nature of that. Now, the Saints defense overall was pretty solid last year. They were a little bit better against the run. They did give up a lot of points to receivers, which is strange because obviously with Marshawn Lattimore being one of the best shutdown corners in the league, basically just meant that there was one receiver that didn't get too many points and everyone else kind of blew up around him. So this overall, though, a divisional game, a game in which we're not really sure what Tom Brady is going to look like. I'm expecting this one to be pretty high score and pretty competitive. I'm not really going to talk myself out of playing any of my studs. Obviously, with Evans out, that is making Godwin arguably the start of the week, even though it probably means he's going to end up bringing a shadow from Lattimore the whole game. So that is a little bit of a concern if Lattimore ends up shadowing Godwin now that Evans is gone. They could cap his ceiling a little bit, but there's no way you're going to talk yourself into benching Godwin. I think he's good enough that even if he gets a Lattimore shadow, with Brady throwing him the ball, I think he'll still have a good enough game. You're probably going to start Gronk in this one. With Evans out, he stands a pretty good shot at scoring multiple touchdowns here. The running back situation is murky. If I had to start one between Ronald Jones and Fournette, I would start Ronald Jones this week. Just with Fournette joining the team late, most likely going to take a few weeks to truly get acclimated to that offense. But I'm not going to try to force either guy out there in this game where I'm expecting it to turn pretty high scoring pretty quickly. Probably not going to be as much running the ball out in this one. Now, Scott Miller is another interesting name to keep in the back of your hat. If you have Hopkins, if you have someone from the Cardinals 49ers game like Kirk that you were planning on playing, and that game does end up getting canceled, this is an afternoon game, and someone that is most likely on your waiver wire, with Evans most likely out, Scott Miller becomes a pretty interesting name that you could potentially throw in as like a panic play in case that 49ers and Cardinals game gets canceled. And then even O.J. Howard could end up being a pretty decent play with Evans out if you need someone to replace Kittle should that Cardinals 49ers game get canceled. Those are a few names I would stash if you have a spot on your bench, either Miller or Howard, if you're concerned about that game potentially getting canceled, which, I mean, at this point, it's definitely a realistic possibility, and not many people are talking about it. So make sure you have some of these guys on your bench just in case. You're going to need to, think about that. I'm sure they'll let us know early on, so you don't necessarily have to pivot to a guy in these later afternoon games, but I'm just saying these names out there because they're most likely on your waiver wire, and with Evans out, could be a really nice 1 week play. All right, and then the Saints. I mean, the Saints are one of the easiest teams to do start sits on because you're always going to start Breeze, Kamara, and Thomas. And I think Jared Cook probably won't be someone that will start every week, but in this matchup particularly, I would definitely throw Cook out there. I mean, this could be a 4 or 5 touchdown game for Drew Brees going against the BUCS, who were pretty abysmal against the pass last year. Don't know how much better they'll be this year. Now, likely one of Traquan Smith or Emmanuel Sanders will also have a good game. There's usually at least a decent wide receiver too when Breeze is playing hot, but I want to kind of see how that situation bends itself out over time. I think Sanders would probably be the better play if I had to choose between the two of them, but Traquan Smith was getting a lot of love from Breeze in camp, and he could end up surprising. So Traquan Smith is another one of those names you could potentially throw on your bench and throw into your flex if you need a late start. Someone that has a lot of upside and is pretty much undrafted in every format. And then there's no way I'm starting Latavius Murray unless Alvin Kamara gets hurt again. But I'm probably trying to avoid both defenses in this game just because I am expecting it to be higher scoring. I'm going to go chalk with this one, and I will take the Saints beating the BUCS 34-27, hitting the over, but having the Saints cover their 4-point spread. I think Drew Brees and the Saints get it done in New Orleans. Tom Brady, with lacking Mike Evans, I think he comes out and gets an L with his first game with his new squad. Love Michael Thomas this week. Let's see what else we got here. Yeah, Drew Brees should definitely be in a lot of lineups this week. I'm not sure why you would talk yourself out of starting Drew Brees in arguably the highest scoring game on the week, unless the Rams-Cowboys game ends up being that way. Let's see. I do like Emmanuel Sanders if you need him in a pinch, but I'm not sure what that division is going to look like, because Michael Thomas is going to get a ton of targets, Kamara is going to get a ton of targets, and Cook is going to be a decent threat in the red zone. So what does that leave for both Emmanuel Sanders and Tre'Quan Smith? I'm not sure at this point. If you need to, I don't think Sanders is the worst play in the world, but there's probably better options out there. Yes, the BUCS cornerbacks are trash. I know, dude. Mike Evans already getting hurt. So we got Mike Evans, we got Kenny Golladay likely out, and Cortland Sutton likely out. 3 guys going, between rounds 3 and 5. Sometimes Mike Evans even went as early as the second round. Already starting the year off pretty poorly in terms of injuries for the receivers. It's not fun. It's not pretty, but at least with the receiver, there's typically an option that you can find on the waiver wire and still have like a week 1 start that could potentially do well for you. Hopefully they get healthy and this isn't something that they deal with all season long. Yeah, Fuller is going to be a monster if he stays healthy. That's obviously a really big if. His entire career, it's been a pretty big if. But, I mean, last night, Deshaun Watson basically had nowhere else to go. Now, I do think Brandon Cooks will eventually get more work in this offense as he gets healthy and deals with that quad injury. So, don't sleep on Brandon Cooks just yet. But, obviously, Will Fuller, good signs for him getting 20 fantasy points in a game where pretty much was just doing it all in garbage time. Yeah, dude, the smoke level is a very, very serious situation. Like we need to definitely keep that in mind. All right, let's jump over to the Cowboys and Rams and talk about this game. Like I said, very exciting afternoon game slate here, and then we get a even better Sunday night game. This should be very interesting. Now, the last time we saw the Cowboys and Rams play, the Cowboys kind of came out flat, and I'm expecting them to be a little bit stronger in this one. Overall, highest over-under on the week. Definitely think this has the potential to be a very high point total game for fantasy as well. And hopefully the Cowboys aren't as flat as they were the last time we played the Rams. I think they'll be fine. So we got the Cowboys technically winning this one by 3 in terms of what Vegas is looking at, giving us an implied point total of 27-24, above 50 over-unders, pretty intense. Last year, both of these teams were pretty average overall. Cowboys were pretty decent against the receivers, but with the loss of Byron Jones, probably going to be a little bit weaker in that regard. Now, the one area to definitely watch in terms of offense and defense battles in this one, the Cowboys have one of the best defensive lines in the league, and the Rams have one of the worst offensive lines. So this could actually be a pretty brutal game for Jared Goff if he gets hit early. That kind of seems to be like the strategy, right? Like if you can get Jared Goff off of his game early, punch him in the mouth a little bit. That was kind of what Bill Belichick did in the Super Bowl back in 2018. So that would be my only concern, is that the Rams get off to a shaky start and then can't recuperate. But I think they run a lot more 12 personnel this year, keeping the 2 tight ends on the field to give Jared Goff a little bit more time. I think overall this would be a pretty high-scoring game because the Cowboys' defense, outside of that defensive line, is garbage. So we'll see what this turns into. But again, this is going to be a pretty easy situation for me. I'm starting all of the names that I drafted and expecting to be starters. Yes, Jalen Ramsey is going to be involved, as I was talking about a little bit earlier. I am probably a little bit more concerned about Gallup than I would be Cooper with Ramsey, because I think Cooper is going to play a lot in the slot, and Ramsey doesn't typically shadow people into the slot. So in the plays that Cooper is in the slot, Ramsey will probably move over to Gallup coming out of the X. But I think the plan is to keep Cooper and Lamb moving in and out of the slot throughout the entire game. So I think there will be enough targets going around for both Cooper and Gallup to still have a pretty good game. I'd be willing to start Jarwin in this one. Dak Prescott has historically targeted his tight end a good bit. With Jason Witten, and I think Blake Jarwin could have a pretty decent game here, especially if the Cowboys have to put up 34 points to win, which is what I'm expecting to happen for them a lot, with the fact that their defense is going to give up a lot of points. The Cowboys are going to have to score a lot just to stay in games. Dak Prescott could arguably be the number 1 quarterback on the week, and you're starting all of the main starters here for the Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb, I guess you could throw him out there in a pinch if you need to, but rookie receivers we're expecting to at least take a couple weeks to get acclimated. Receivers are a little bit harder to jettison into an offense, unlike running backs. I don't think we're going to see massive breakout games from all the rookie receivers. Probably have one or two that have a pretty nice week one. But CeeDee Lamb would be a guy I would at least wait a few weeks on and see what his usage looks like. Tony Pollard is pretty much a bench until Zeke gets hurt. Or, I mean, we'll see. If they end up trying to use Tony Pollard like the Browns used Kareem Hunt, it's a possibility that would lower Zeke's ceiling and bring Pollard into a flex consideration, but we don't know that. I mean, everything has pretty much been radio silence on the part of the Cowboys throughout the offseason. We don't really know much of what's going on. They haven't really talked to us much. So this is pretty much flying blind here and just going off of our assumption of what this offense and defense will look like. But the basic premise here is start your studs. I got confidence in Jarwin, and that's that for the Cowboys. On the Rams side, I mean, same thing, right? We're going to start Goff because this should be a high-scoring shootout game. Goff, is either a really bad quarterback play or a top 12 guy, and I think this is a week where he'll be a top 12 guy. Probably got him pretty cheap, and he'll end up having, he has a better matchup than guys like Stafford. He has a better matchup. And then a lot of quarterbacks are actually drafted above him. I mean, you could even make an argument starting Goff over Brady. I think, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are probably going to end up eating a lot in this one. Without Byron Jones there, there's not really a lot of cornerbacks to impose their will. We'll see how Diggs does for the Cowboys, but, he's a rookie, so we're not expecting him to make a massive impact right away. And then I still have faith in Tyler Higbee. I like him better than Gerald Everett. And all reports out of camp are that Tyler Higbee is very centric in this offense. Like, they designed the offense to function around Tyler Higbee, and I think that he comes out and eats in this opening game. So I'm pretty much starting all of the main guys here with the exception of the running backs. Now, I'm concerned for the running backs in this game. For one, as we've mentioned already, that defensive front for the Cowboys is very strong, and the offensive line of the Rams is very weak. If this turns into a shootout pretty quickly, the Rams may have to abandon the run, as we saw a lot last year with Todd Gurley. There are plenty of games that Todd Gurley barely had any rushing yards because they had to abandon the run so quickly. And with the uncertain touch distribution between Cam Akers, Malcolm Brown, and with Darrell Henderson potentially playing this week, it could be an ugly week one for the rookie. So of all the rookie running backs, I'm hesitant to throw Akers and Swift out there this week just because we're not really sure what that touch distribution is going to look like. So if you have a better option, pivot off of Akers this week. But if I had to choose one, I'd still go with upside of the rookie over Malcolm Brown because, Malcolm Brown is a jag. He'll probably end up getting a few touchdowns and annoying people this year, but he's not going to ever put up, enough fantasy points that you're going to be upset that you didn't start him. And then I'm just avoiding both defenses in this game. Both of these defenses lost a lot of key pieces, and I'm expecting them to both not be very productive for fantasy purposes. Corey Littleton is gone. Byron Jones is gone. Not going to be a pretty sight for either of these defenses this week. So in terms of the spread, I think the Cowboys cover. I got the Cowboys winning this one 35-24, and I think this would be a score point that you're going to want to get used to with the Cowboys, assuming health. It's going to be a very robust season for Cowboys offense this year, and I think you're going to be happy that having Cowboys on your team. I think the Rams keep up for a while, but in the end they can't pull it out. So I got the Cowboys winning this one in the Rams opener in SoFi Stadium. All right, let's see what's going on over here. Looks like we're having a discussion about Derek Carr here. So, all right, let's see where this started. I'm curious now. Yeah, Derek Carr is no Mahomes as well. I mean, it's not really fair to compare anyone to Mahomes, right? But it's true. Derek Carr is historically a pretty low average depth of target quarterback. But again, he's never really had a receiver like Henry Ruggs, so it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation here, and we'll know. We'll know by the end of 2020 whether or not Derek Carr is the future of the Raiders. And the argument back with like 70% completion rate for Derek Carr, that was great, but Teddy Bridgewater was right up there in terms of completion rate. Are we arguing that Teddy Bridgewater would be great with Henry Ruggs? I'm not sure. I feel like in terms of like profiling quarterbacks, Derek Carr and Teddy Bridgewater are very comparable in terms of their tendencies to stay near the line of scrimmage, not go deep very often, play it safe. They're not the kind of quarterback that's going to throw 30 interceptions like Jameis Winston, but they're not the kind of quarterback either that you're going to see just go bonanza on any given week, because that's just not their style. So if Derek Carr is actually, if he's just been reserving himself until he actually had weapons, we'll see it. Obviously, he could go through an evolution. He had a season where he was in the running to be an MVP, but since that season, it's really just been more of a game manager, like an Alex Smith type situation, where he's just never really had the weapons to really want to come out of his shell. This is the first year that he has it, so we'll see what Derek Carr can do this year. Thanks for putting the show together. Need help with my flex start. Standard scoring, okay? So Melvin Gordon, Marquise Brown, or Zach Moss. You're starting Drake and Kamara at running back, Godwin and Thielen at wide receivers. Okay, so we're going to keep Godwin and Thielen. Those guys are locked and loaded at receiver. And then, obviously, Drake and Kamara, those guys are solid. Now, again, bear in mind, if the Cardinals 49ers game gets canned, then that's going to make this situation a little bit easier for who you start. But obviously, it's not a good situation because that would mean that Drake is out. But assuming that game plays, we're just talking to flex. I'm leaning between Melvin Gordon and Marquise Brown. So I think Melvin Gordon is going to see the higher leverage touches in the game against Tennessee, but we'll get to that game in a second. I'm not expecting the Broncos to have a pretty strong showing in that one. So I think Marquise Brown playing against that completely beat up Cleveland secondary, I'd actually probably swing for the fences with Marquise Brown because he's one of those guys. He's like that Stephon Diggs, Will Fuller type that can absolutely win you your week. And when you have him on your bench and he blows up for 30 plus points, you're kicking yourself. So in week one, assuming Drake plays, I would probably swing for the fences with Marquise Brown over Melvin Gordon going against a tough Tennessee defense. We'll get to Deontay Johnson in just a second. All right. Jumping over to the Steelers and the Giants. I feel like this game isn't really getting the respect that it deserves. This is going to be a very interesting storyline to observe. I want to know how this game turns out for Big Ben. We haven't seen Big Ben since his injury in week 2, and he looked pretty bad to start the year last year. But prior to that, he was the leading passer on the season, threw over 600 times, over 5,000 yards. How much of his arm strength does he have back? Who's his favorite target going to be? Is James Conner going to stay healthy? What does this team look like? They already have, some pretty key injuries on their offensive line. The Steelers have a lot of question marks, and I feel like the Giants are going to help us answer them because the Giants aren't exactly an opposing team either. But the Giants have a decent amount of question marks in their own right. Who's going to be the number one receiver for Daniel Jones? Golden Tate's dealing with a hamstring injury, and he's getting up there in age. I don't like receivers with a hamstring injury, but I definitely don't like 31, 32-year-old receivers with a hamstring injury. So is Sterling Shepard going to be the main guy? Is Darius Slayton the favorite guy? Or does Evan Ingram finally play 16 games? So there is a lot of fantasy potential between these two teams, and I'm hoping we get some answers this week. But overall, I think this should be a pretty fun game. Over under 47, so one of the higher ones on the week. Steelers are projected to be the road favorites in this one. 26-20 is the implied point total. Now, the Steelers had arguably the most lockdown defense last year for fantasy. They were one of the few teams that we were actually actively avoiding players when they played against the Steelers. But I think that also had a lot to do with the fact that their offense was so bad that by nature of the way that the games were being played, they never turned into a high volume game with a lot of scoring. So with Big Ben back and Ben's potential to throw a lot of interceptions as well, I don't think their defense is going to be as effective because of having to be on the field more often. It's kind of like, the Buccaneers defense will be better because Jameis Winston isn't throwing the ball. Well, the Steelers defense will most likely be worse because of Ben Roethlisberger throwing more interceptions, even though he'll also be scoring more points. So I'm going to reserve my judgment on avoiding players against the Steelers until we know exactly what this is going to look like. And then obviously the Giants, they got a little better against the run as the season went on, but they were pretty terrible against the pass all of last year. They had a few big key pickups this year, but we'll see if they can actually bring it together. Bringing in a new regime with Joe Judge there, it's going to be a make or break year to see if Dave Gettleman keeps his job there as GM. And I think this will be a pretty rocky start when you look at the Giants' schedule. I think they can actually be competitive in this one. So in terms of the Steelers, look, if you drafted Big Ben, you want to play him in good matchups, right? Like that's why you drafted Big Ben. Well, this is most certainly a good matchup. So you're going to start Big Ben. James Conner, you're going to start every week until he's hurt. And then once he's hurt, then I'm sorry. I hope he can play 16 games. I've been saying this for a while. If James Conner plays 16 games, we all underdrafted him pretty drastically. Like James Conner could be one of the best running backs on the league, or in the league, if he plays 16 games. And they're going to give him 80-85% of the touches. He's going to be used as a receiver out of the backfield because that's the way that Mike Tomlin has always done it, and Big Ben likes to use his running backs like that. So in a great defensive matchup here, James Conner could be top 5 running back on the week. Now, I'm nervous about Deontay Johnson's foot injury. This is it's almost like a similar story with what happened with Juju last year. So everyone was pumped up for Juju. He was a first, second round pick. Everyone's excited about him. He absolutely killed it the year before. And then a few days before the season started, he had a toe injury. And he came out and he looked slow. And he wasn't able to cut nearly as crisply as he used to. And then Big Ben gets hurt. And then Juju gets concussed. And then he gets another injury. Like thing after thing after thing started racking up for Juju. Whereas now we're in a situation where we haven't heard much about Juju. We know that Big Ben and Juju were working out in the offseason together, but he didn't show too much in camp. We don't know whether they were just trying to keep Juju healthy or if he's been, fading in the background. Deontay Johnson was getting some love from Big Ben, and then now he has a foot injury. So he's saying he's fully healthy, but I'm not buying it. I'm nervous about Deontay Johnson in this one. With James Washington there, with Eric Ebron getting ramped up a lot in terms of what they're planning on using him for, Connor being involved, Juju going to get a lot of love, and potentially seeing Chase Claypool get involved, I want to hold off on Deontay Johnson until he shows us that he's healthy. When we're talking about absolute studs that you draft in the first couple rounds, I'll give them a pass if they tell me they're healthy. We don't know that much about Deontay Johnson yet. We haven't seen him with Big Ben. His breakout season was with Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges, so we don't know the chemistry that Ben is going to have with Deontay Johnson. I'm just hesitant. I like him as a player. I think he's going to have a pretty good year, but until we're sure that he's actually recovered from that foot injury, I'm probably going to hold off on starting him. And if he ends up going off my bench, to me it's worth the wait. Now, that being said, Juju is a smash play this week. The last time we saw him with Big Ben, he still put up a decent amount of points against the Patriots, even in a game where they got completely routed. And I think Juju reminds us what a receiver he is heading into this game against the Giants. That, especially if Juju is able to go back into the slot with Washington and Claypool and Deontay Johnson able to operate in the X and Z role. Juju is going to eat a lot this year, and I really think he's going to start this game off pretty strongly. And I'd still be willing to start the Steelers' D just going against the Giants. If Daniel Jones isn't able to completely fix his fumbling issues, could be a pretty high-scoring game for the Steelers' defense in fantasy. Now, Eric Ebron, I have him in my second guess category. I'm okay starting him if you need like a dart throw at tight end, if you're in a deeper league or a tight end premium league. The way that they're talking about this guy, they're making it sound like they're going to use him like George Kittle. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, and if they do, he's probably going to get hurt. But might be someone you want to throw on your bench. Every year there's a couple tight ends that we just completely overlook in terms of how we're valuing them in the drafts. And Eric Ebron is definitely in that category of really talented tight end on a high volume pass offense that could outperform what we were expecting of him. So Eric Ebron is someone I'd probably avoid starting this week, but definitely worth a stash on your bench just in case he turns into that week 2 waiver pickup guy. James Washington, same thing as Deontay Johnson. I don't know what his workload is going to be. I'm not playing him at least until we start seeing an established role here. He's probably someone that's even on your waiver wire. So, I mean, if the 49ers Cardinals game gets canceled and you need an absolute dart throw, I guess you could throw him out there in case Deontay Johnson is really limited, but I'm probably not going to do that. All right, and then jumping over to the Giants, I mean, you don't need me to tell you to start Saquon Barkley. And if you drafted Evan Ingram is basically the old version of Jordan Reed. For those of you that watch the fantasy football, it's Rule 86. I mean, it's basically Rule 88. If Evan Ingram is healthy, you play him. If he's not, you don't. Well, he's healthy. He didn't start the season on PUP. He's not on the injury report, and that's a good sign. So we're going to start Evan Ingram. Now, between Shepard and Slayton, if I had to pick one, I would pick Shepard. I think Shepard could end up still having a pretty good game here, especially if the Steelers start off with a couple quick scores, and Shepard could end up, getting Will Fuller type workload in this game where it's like nothing crazy deep, not getting a lot of touchdowns, but could have like 8 or 9 receptions for 80 to 100 yards and have a pretty good game in PPR. Slayton is more of a big play guy, but with the Steelers, be able to lock the receivers down, I don't know that he's able to break anything in this one. He has a very high bust potential for me. Same thing with Daniel Jones. Probably not going to roll him out against the Steelers. Want to see if the Steelers are able to impose their will on defense like they were able to last year. We'll wait and see with Daniel Jones. I think he'll have a pretty good year, but probably going to start off on the wrong foot here against the Steelers. Golden Tate dealing with a hamstring injury. I don't want anything to do with that, and I don't know that there's any point this year that you'll be starting the Giants defense. I think this one will be a little bit lower scoring than some people are expecting. I got the Steelers winning this one 21-17. But I think we'll at least have some of our questions answered about Ben, Deontay Johnson, Juju Smith-Schuster, hopefully by the end of this game. Let's see if we got any more questions. I don't trust James Conner. I mean, I don't know what there is to not trust about him in terms of his talent. I don't trust him because I don't think he's going to stay healthy. So if that's what you're suggesting or that's what you're getting at, okay, we're on the same page 100%. My thing with James Conner is we know how Tomlin plays. He doesn't like to take his running back off the field. He likes to keep him out there constantly. And as long as James Conner is healthy, that's how they're going to use him. Let's see. Do you think Saquon will be the running back 1 of 2020? I mean, I'm not going to say anyone is going to beat Christian McCaffrey. If anyone has a good chance of doing it, I think Saquon probably has the best chance. But with Nate Solder opting out, that could impede him a little bit. And he was also dealing with a little bit of a hamstring injury in training camp. So could start off a little bit slower. That might make finishing as the running back 1 overall a little bit harder. But I'm not going to bet against him either. Saquon Barkley is a freak of nature and definitely has that in his range of outcomes. Anyway, all right, so I think that is it in terms of questions. The last Monday night game, one that probably won't be as exciting for football purposes, but one that's still going to be pretty interesting for fantasy. We're talking the Tennessee Titans and the Denver Broncos here, and looking at it's not a debut for Drew Lock, and we're already seeing, unfortunately, the loss of Cortland Sutton is going to not give him quite the offense that we were expecting to see. So they go and completely retool and throw a bunch of offensive weapons at Drew Lock, basically in an effort to say, prove to us that you're our guy, or we're going to go trade for Aaron Rodgers in the offseason next year. Whereas the Titans are basically the same team that they were last year, plus Jadeveon Clowney. Guys, I feel like I'm turning into a Titans truther here, because across the fantasy sphere and just football in general, I feel like the Titans don't get a lot of respect. And I think they're a really good team. They showed last year, once Ryan Tannehill got going, they had a very efficient offense. Derrick Henry is arguably one of the best running backs in the league. Their defense was pretty prolific last year, and adding Jadeveon Clowney, this could be a really solid team if they can stay healthy. They have a strong offensive philosophy with just giving complete bowling balls between A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, and Jonnu Smith. This is going to be a very hard team to tackle. And one thing that we know, too, from the last time we had a lockout situation, one of the big things that we saw, especially early on, and we kind of saw it last night in the Chiefs-Texans game, one of the biggest differences is tackling players. It seems that defenses have a harder time bringing people down that first couple weeks when there isn't a preseason, they're just a little bit rusty. And some of the hardest players to tackle in the NFL are Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown. So in a situation where we're already seeing that be a potential chance, I mean, Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown could just completely bowl players over for the first couple weeks of the season, and they might just never stop. I mean, A.J. Brown last year, after he actually started seeing 70% of the snaps, like was actually running routes on 70% of plays, he was second in fantasy scoring outside of only Michael Thomas, and I think he even beat out Devontae Parker from week 10 on. So A.J. Brown is definitely someone that I'm super pumped for this year. But let's talk about this game specifically. I'm giving too much love to the Titans right now. So over under 41, they're expecting this to be a lower scoring game, and that might be the MO with the Titans overall. But I think their offense is efficient enough, and it's concentrated, right? That's anytime we have a lower volume offense, we want it to be concentrated around specific players. So like the Vikings are a lower volume offense, but we love Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook. Why? Because there aren't any other players that are taking away targets. The Titans, to me, are the Vikings of the AFC. You have a good defense. You have a really efficient quarterback, not a barn burner by any means, but someone that can get the job done, a strong running back, and a really, really good wide receiver and a good tight end. Most of the targets are going to go to Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, or most of the touches and targets are going to go to Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, and Jonnu Smith. So it's a very concentrated offense. We're going to be able to project that these guys are going to score pretty well whenever they have a decent matchup. So right now the Titans are slated to win this one by 2.5 points. Now last year the Titans were average on defense. Bringing in Jadeveon Clowney I think will help them a little bit. And obviously some of this, their team was a completely different team by the back end of the year than they were early on. So I've kind of thrown last year's numbers out. And then obviously the Broncos, losing a few key pieces, obviously losing Von Miller is going to hurt them a lot. I think their defense takes a pretty massive step back this year. So I don't think the Titans are going to have a very hard time asserting their will in this one. So obviously you're starting Henry, you're starting Brown, and I think you can start the Titans defense. Without Courtland Sutton there, I'm not nearly as nervous about what Drew Lock is going to do, and I think the Titans can end up, getting a few sacks on him and potentially, getting a pick six, which they had a lot of defensive scores last year. The Titans D were a sneaky defense all season long, or not all season, but once Tannehill took over. So I like the Titans D in this one. Tannehill is an okay start, not someone that I'm trying to force into my lineup because I don't know how many points the Titans are going to need to score to win this game. And Jonnu Smith, I want to see how much they use him. Last year, he was incredibly efficient with the touches that they gave him, but they did not give him very many touches. So if that trend continues, Jonnu Smith might just be one of those players we're going to be waiting all year for the breakout for. If you have a better option, I think you go with it, someone that has a higher projected volume, but I do know that Jonnu Smith has the ability to break a long touchdown pass or run. He's a pretty good running back himself at any time. And then with Corey Davis already dealing with an injury, I'm done. Corey Davis is dead to me. All right, looking over at the Broncos, if we have to start a running back here, I'm still okay with starting Melvin Gordon. He's probably going to end up getting the goal line carries and will most likely be used in more high leverage situations, probably be used more as a passer. I am concerned about his overall usage, though. They're talking a lot about 50-50 splits between him and Lindsey, and it could end up turning into a pretty ugly situation. But if you drafted Melvin Gordon, you're probably in a situation where you have to start him unless you were talking like the guy earlier where you had Marquise Brown. So I'm going to throw him out there. Hopefully comes out and has a really good week one. Put a vote of confidence in him, and then if he does have a good week one, then you can trade him away. Now, Jerry Jeudy, I had on my bench list, but with Courtland Sutton out, by nature of what's happening in this offense, I think Jerry Jeudy could actually come out and have a pretty solid week one. Noah Fant as well. Both of these guys will have to take a much bigger step forward in this offense with Courtland Sutton probably missing this week. Do have a backup plan in place if you can. I don't think Courtland Sutton is going to play, but I guess there's a chance that he still comes out. So keep that in mind also. I'm probably not going to play Phillip Lindsay, and I don't trust the Broncos defense heading against Ryan Tannehill and the Titans. And again, I'm not going to trust Drew Lock until I see it, especially with Courtland Sutton out going against a tougher Titans team. I'm not in yet. I know Bronco fans are super excited for this year, and I could be wrong, but I'm not throwing lock out there in week 1 if I can avoid it. I think the Titans win this one pretty handily. I got the Titans winning this one 31-14. I think this will be one of the bigger blowouts on the week. Phew. All right, guys, that is all 16 games that we've gone through in the last 2 days. Talked about all the fantasy relevant players. You can see our entire list of rankings on our website at fantasyaddictionnetwork.com. I need to do another update. We'll try to update those for you guys every day, but at least every other day, and they will be updated, for you guys prior to Sunday morning in case there's anything else that happens between now and then in terms of injuries. So, use that if you're trying to decide who to start this week. You can use that as a tiebreaker. You can access the website for free this year. I'm not charging anybody for it. I just want to, continue to give back to this community because I just love the game of football, especially in 2020. Like, there just needs to be more love going around, right? So I'm excited to be able to provide that for you guys this year. So check that out. Hit me up with any questions as well. My goal is to respond to every single person that comments on my videos this year. If I forget you, I apologize, but my goal is to get back to everybody. But that's pretty much it for this video. Let me check over the comment section and see what else is going on here. My bold prediction is that AJ Brown finishes in the top 8 wide receivers this year. I mean, I don't know that that's bold. Last year, he was a top 8 guy once Tannehill took over and they actually started giving him that many touches. I mean, assuming that he plays anywhere near where he did last year, I think that's a given. So, I mean, I guess it's bold in terms of the fact that not many people are projecting him to be there, but I like AJ Brown a ton this year. I have him in half of my leagues. And I think that the Titans as a whole will be a better offense than people are giving them credit for. And let's see, Paint Chip, you had a flex question. Let me see. I must have missed it. Give me a second. I don't see your flex question, Paint Chip. Can you ask it again? Let's see, did I miss anything else? Talked about Anthony McFarland seems like Willie Parker 2.0. I mean, I like McFarland a lot as a talent, but until we see Tomlin actually show that he will ever do a running back by committee, it might be difficult for McFarland to have enough usage on the field to actually be fantasy productive. Now, I do think that James Conner will probably be out of Pittsburgh next year, and then it's wheels up for Anthony McFarland. But 2020, probably not a decent year. Let's see. All right. Well, I don't see your flex question, Paint Chip, so please reach out in the comment section after this stream is done, and I'll get back to you. But I think that's pretty much it, guys. So thank you for joining us on this Friday evening. Our goal will actually be to do the early games on Wednesday, the late games on Thursday. Friday, we'll just have a general discussion about strategy and what have we learned from week 1 heading into week 2. And then Saturday, we'll do our daily fantasy stream. So be on the lookout for that. Hit that subscribe button to be notified. Hit that bell as well to be notified when we drop new stuff. Appreciate you guys joining me. Have a wonderful weekend and good luck this Sunday.